hats.
You may have just heard that. I'm going to go ahead and start the restream. There might be an issue with YouTube, so I'm going to go ahead and just record this, and we may have to load it up tomorrow. But for those watching, should be live here on Facebook as well. So let me go ahead and start the music, and we'll let everybody in.
Right.
Speak up. You can say it. Yeah. You get first. Right? Have fun.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, April 24th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. Great to see you all this evening, and it's also great to welcome back Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It feels like it's been 2 months since I've been on, but it's been 3 weeks. In the intervening time frame, I think most of our members know, Todd and I took 30-some people to New Orleans to see the World War II Museum, which if you haven't been, you got to go. It is literally fantastic. Huge. You got to give yourself, I don't know, we did 2 full days with private tours, and we still didn't get to see everything we could have. So it's immense, and it's incredibly well done. The resources they have are incredible.
Well, we certainly missed you, but glad to have you back. For those of you who may be new to us, we are the Veterans Breakfast Club, and our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Please visit our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org, to find out all there is to know about us. Check out our past programs. Check out our upcoming programs. We have both in-person and online programs coming every week, and including tonight, which is our part 2 of the Okinawa story, this time focusing on the Navy, right, Glenn?
Exactly. Correct. 3 weeks ago, we did a program with Seth Paradon, the historian that does a couple of podcasts, and he's a military historian for the U.S. military. Just incredible knowledge of the Battle of Okinawa. But we focused on the U.S. Army at Okinawa, which I think was revealing for a lot of people. In the past, we've done programs on Okinawa, mostly on the Marines, and you kind of lay aside what the Army did. And we found out last 3 weeks ago, just how important the Army involvement was. Talked about several of the many Medal of Honor winners there. So it was an excellent program. And tonight, we're going to focus on the Navy at Okinawa, which we have not done. And we're incredibly fortunate to have 2 guests with us tonight. And one was briefly with us 3 weeks ago, and that's Navy veteran Arthur. Now, I've been working on this last name, Doug. Grabiner. I can't get that accent right. Grabiner. Okay. Arthur, of course, the young man with the hat on, and the older looking fellow to his left is his older brother, Doug.
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's how he likes it.
Arthur, thank you so much for being with us again.
My pleasure.
Okay. And Arthur was on the USS Laurens off of Okinawa in April of 1945. And in a little bit, I've got a few photos of Arthur in his service, and we're going to ask him a few questions.
Sure.
So just hang on for about 5 minutes, and we'll get back to you, Arthur. Thank you. And then with us also is esteemed historian and author, David Sears. David, please say hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, we're just pleased to have you. I've read your books for years. This book that we're going to focus on tonight, I actually read it. I think I told you online, which is one of the few books I have ever done that. Little different experience for his old guy.
Everybody's doing it more and more, I guess.
Yeah. So David is also a Navy veteran, not of World War II, but of Okinawa. I'm sorry, of Vietnam. David, tell us a little bit about your service in the Navy during Vietnam.
Yeah, I can summarize my service pretty quickly. I was commissioned an officer in 1969. I spent a couple years on a U.S. Navy destroyer. In fact, we're going to be looking at destroyers tonight, and I was on a Gearing class destroyer, which is kind of similar, very similar to the types of destroyers that served in the Pacific during World War II. Uh, from there, I went into training, language training, and cultural training for a tour in Vietnam. And I went to Vietnam, I believe, early in 1972. And I was attached to an organization. I was in country in Saigon, I was probably known as a Saigon warrior, but I was with an organization called Commander Naval Forces Vietnam. And this is in 1972 when the United States is beginning to transition out of active combat and more into an advisory capacity. And there were a number of river-based craft in Vietnam under Vietnamese control, but we were advising the Vietnamese Navy on their use and deployment. So I was, at the time, I was probably, I don't know, 22 or 23, and I was a watch officer in a former bakery compound in Saigon. And my duty from 6 days a week from 6 p.m. 1800 to 0600 each day except for one day off. I forget whether it was a Monday or a Sunday. But I was an operations officer doing communications with advisors in the field, arranging for transport and medical evacuations, and sometimes arranging aerial strikes. And a large part of that was when we were sending supplies up to Phnom Penh in Cambodia, and they ran I believe it was a nightly convoy up the, I can't remember the name of the river, I guess the Saigon River. And that was a very active time because there were a lot of shooting going on. And my role was to coordinate, as I say, sometimes evacuations, sometimes airstrikes. And at the conclusion of the night, in the morning, I assembled the briefing package for briefing the admiral in the morning about the night's activities. So it was a unusual year. I don't think of myself as being certainly not in combat and certainly not being in danger compared to other people. But it was an interesting time, and I got an appreciation of what it was to be in a foreign country under, somewhat dangerous conditions.
Yeah.
But I was there for a year, and actually left Vietnam just before the April offensive in 1973. So I truly missed some action then. I think I left in March, and that offensive occurred in April. So better safe than sorry. I left.
Well, timing is always of these.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of my Navy service, probably the most formative thing for me was serving on a U.S. Navy destroyer, and I've had an appreciation ever since. And the book I wrote at War with the Wind was a chance to deal with that, the same types of ships that I served on, 30 years later.
Is that what led you into being a Navy historian, author?
Well, when I left the Navy, I was involved in industrial and labor relations. I went to Cornell University for a graduate degree, and I was employed originally by the New York Times Company in labor and employee relations, and then subsequently by Dow Jones and Company, publishers of the Wall Street Journal. And as I neared retirement age, I've always been a fan of history. I've read a lot, and particularly military history, and because of my service in the Navy, naval history. And you read enough books and you begin to think, oh, maybe I could do that. So I did. I've been at this for about 20 years, I think, and writing books. I've published 6 books and always working on the next one. So
excellent. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
not only your service, but also your service to the memory of the Navy during World
Sure.
War II. I'm writing these books. And I have to say that, when I first met David via Zoom a week or so ago, I thought, wow, guy is perfect. He's got a pirate's hat on.
Yeah.
It's a Penn University hat. And I'm like,
Other end of the state.
so let's go back now to Arthur and Doug. Let me pull up this PowerPoint because I've got a few slides here, photos of Arthur to share. David, were you calling again? No?
No, I'm not. I don't think
Okay.
that was a pocket call,
Okay.
back pocket call.
Got it. Okay, everybody seeing the screen?
We are not seeing the screen.
Oh, what did I do? I think it might have gotten
You're off practice there, Glenn.
3 weeks and I've lost it, huh? Well, I think it also maybe I got the
Oh, maybe I'm not seeing it, but Colin said he's seeing it. Maybe bring it back up. I'm not sure why mine wasn't showing yours.
Okay, give me a minute here.
I'm seeing a lot of new names in the room while Glenn's pulling this up. Great to see you all. Again, we're the Veterans Breakfast Club. It's your first time joining us. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Yeah, we're really pleased to have anybody new on the Zoomcast. And I'm Glenn Flickinger. I do these World War II programs almost every Thursday night. I've taken a couple of weeks off the last couple of weeks, and we'll talk about our upcoming shows a little bit later. How is that now? Everybody see it? Okay. Not sure what went wrong.
You good?
Okay. Just our title slide, Navy at Okinawa. And let me figure out how to advance it, and we'll get right into Arthur. There we go. There's our man, Arthur Grabiner. I have it right yet? I'm getting close.
Grabiner, right.
Now, this is a little dated from 2019, picture of Arthur back then. And as you can see, a much younger Arthur in the lower right-hand corner there. Arthur, you were quite a handsome guy.
Still is.
Thank you.
You still are, that's right. But yeah, maybe a younger handsome guy. When did you join the Navy, Arthur?
I was drafted in 1946.
No, 44, January.
January 1944.
At what age were you then?
I was 18 years old.
A month there.
Right out of high school.
Right out of high school, right into the medical officer, and here I was.
How did you, if I may ask, how is it that you came about to serve in the Navy as opposed to the Army or the Marines?
Oh, most of the people I knew were going into the Army or the Marines. I decided I wanted to be in the Navy. Well, I went for my physical, and they asked, what division would you like to be in? And I said, the Navy. He said, you got it. Well, he told me after I got the Navy, if I asked the Army, anything that I would have asked for, I would still get the Navy.
Well, they must have recognized you as one of the smarter guys. They must have recognized you as one of the smarter guys.
It's one of the smarter guys.
Yes.
And you served aboard the USS Laurens and participated in at least, I'm sure others, but two major campaigns, the Invasion of Lingayen Gulf, which is when we invaded the Philippines in 1944, and then the Battle of Okinawa, of course, which we're going to talk about tonight. What can you tell us about the Philippines, Arthur? Anything story, anything of note you would like to tell us about the Philippines?
Well, in the Philippines, biggest thing that I could tell you about, I got a medical call from the chief doctor. He wanted to see me. Why? I didn't know. Then it turned out I had AB positive blood. That was a very rare blood. So I thought, certainly I'll give a part of my blood, and they put it in a cooler. It was in there till the ship was decommissioned. It was my lucky charm, the ship's lucky charm.
They never used your blood.
Never used it for you.
Never.
But that was the in January of 45. That was the first kamikaze attack on your task unit.
That's right.
On this island.
This island, USS Island, we were prepared to go in for the kamikaze, for the attack against the Japanese. Well, we got there, and they got there too, and they were pretty feisty, and they kamikazes hit some of our ships.
So David, just to switch over to your knowledge, I personally was not aware that there were kamikaze attacks there at the Lingayen Gulf. Were those?
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, we're going to talk tonight about the first, attack in the wake of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, but certainly in January of 1945, when they were invading the other side of the Philippines. Yeah, there were numerous kamikaze strikes there at that time.
So Arthur, you fought through two battles where there were kamikaze attacks,
Correct. Yes.
and Okinawa.
Yes, we did.
And if I may add, 2 months ago, he returned to the Philippines, Manila more specifically, for the first time in 80 years. He and a 101-year-old Army veteran, John Hodges from Virginia. And it may very well be the last time that a World War II veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces ever sets foot on Philippine soil.
Wow. I'm sure they gave you a royal welcome.
Oh, they certainly did.
President greeted you, the ambassador.
A royal welcome they gave me.
Yeah. Well, I have some background with the Philippines and the Filipinos, and I know how appreciative they're kind of like the South Koreans. I've been to South Korea too, and they just love Americans because they recall what we did for them. So that was fantastic of you to go. So Arthur, let's jump to the Philippines and the USS Laurens. So what was your job? What did you do?
I was a yeoman. As you know, we get shifted all over times. I spent from 12 midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning on the bridge with the officer of the day. Other times I was a lookout on different sections of the ship. They shifted me all over the place, and we were lucky.
But I think I heard you say you were the helmsman. So you're the guy standing at the big wheel.
No, he was a yeoman second class.
Yeoman. Okay.
Yeoman. What were your responsibilities as a yeoman?
Well,
the documentation.
We had all documentation between the ship and the official Navy officers. We had to record everything, send them in, and do recording of local items on my ship.
Okay.
Now, yeomen are universally known as the smartest people in the Navy.
Doug, I hope you got your father's.
They hold all the secrets too.
They give out the Liberty passes.
That's right.
They're popular. And what kind of ship was the USS Laurens? What was its task?
USS Laurens was an attack transport ship. We carried
landing craft,
24 landing craft, which we utilized in taking troops into the Philippines
and Okinawa.
How
large was your crew?
We had a crew of 150.
550.
550. We had 200 landing craft. 24 landing craft, and each landing craft had their own crew of 2 men. And then all of the men that were there to prepare the landing craft, get them in order and get them fitted, and we were pretty busy.
May I ask the age, the breakdown of the age of the crew?
On my crew, the breakdown, more than 50% were my age, 18 years old. The older guys were marvelous. They took them in their hand, and they turned out two sterling crews.
Wow. Wow. So, Arthur, during battle stations, what would have been your battle station position?
My battle station, usually I watch. Everybody stands some sort of watch from 4 o'clock and 12 o'clock in the morning to 4 a.m. And I was with the officer. I was connected to the engine room, and he would tell me how fast or slow the ship should go, 24 knots, 18 knots, etc. And that went on for months and months. Or stood watch at the other sections of the ship also.
Well, were you a talker at the gun?
I was a talker on a 5-inch gun, on a 40-millimeter gun. I was a lookout on the bridge into the future to see what's those in the cargo up in the bird's nest couldn't see, but we were able to see.
Wow. And during the kamikaze attacks that occurred off Okinawa or Lingayen Gulf, would you have been on the bridge seeing these kamikazes attack the ships around you?
Oh, certainly. Well, I was a lookout on the bridge when the ship went in front of us, went out of order and set sail on its own, a straight thing. And then it got hit by a kamikaze. And that was the officer they was with me. That was adventurous trip.
Well, what was it? It was about 10 minutes to 6 in the morning at Okinawa, April 2nd. What happened, if you could describe it?
Well,
the cloud?
It was about 10 to 6. And outside, the ship got out of position.
The Tyrell.
And was trying to get back into position in front of us. It opened up a third lane going straight. We use a zigzag formation every day in the Philippines and Okinawa. And this ship went straight, and boom, out of the sky comes a kamikaze and heads right for it. The officer who had the executive officer happened to be standing next to me, started to scream, "Make smoke, make smoke." And in a minute, we were covered with white smoke.
Why?
To prevent us from being hit by a kamikaze.
Well, how do you see where you're going then?
Well, we had
radar.
Excellent radar men, and on the bridge, those that had they could watch things, and with the compass, and we were lucky. We got through it.
So what happens later that same day? Burial?
Later that same day, all instructions come through to all ships in my group, TAC group, that we were to appear on top deck about 4:30 in the afternoon, dressed in a dressed white uniform and standing there at ease at given. On all the ships, they started to blow taps, and we stood at attention. Burial at sea commenced.
From the other ships where there had been killed in action?
From the other sister ships?
Yes, the other ship that went and was supposed to be in front of us ended up on the side of us. They lost a good number of their crew.
So what happens at the burial at sea? What actually?
At the burial at sea, they take the deceased and put them in a weighted canvas bag, and they seal them, and they then drop them
with the American flag,
and they slide them over the side of the ship into the Pacific. That's where they are. Their family gets a telegram from the War Department telling them your so-and-so was buried at sea in the Philippines at Okinawa, and that's it. That's the end of you.
Wow. Well, I got to tell you, Arthur and Doug, it's breathtaking to hear Arthur's memories, and they're so acute, so good, of someone under kamikaze attack, someone, in the way of, in the middle of a combat, and then this story of the burial. Let me stop asking questions and ask if anybody in our audience, including David, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of Arthur before we move along. Anything
Dave?
in the chat, Sean?
Real quick from Barb Smith, she said Bob was aboard the USS FDR and the USS Intrepid, and Mr. Grabiner is a volunteer aboard the Intrepid Museum. Just wanted to say a hello between the two of you, Barb and Bob. I'm going to look through the chat, see if there's any other questions. Barb, where'd you go? I lost your window. David, if you have any other... There you are, Barb. I just found you. I'll ask you to unmute.
Talk. Hello, what an honor, sir, to meet you.
Oh, look at that shirt.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you see a shirt?
Yeah, look at that.
Here's where you
The
are.
fighting guy?
The fighting guy, yes.
The fighting guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was so proud of that ship.
Yeah.
So Bob, you served on the Intrepid?
Yes, from 62 to 63, I was on the Roosevelt before that. And I guess my best memory with the Intrepid, we went to Quebec, down the St. Lawrence Seaway, and docked in Quebec and had a fantastic time. Other than that,
Nobody shot at you from Canada.
no. A lot of people hollered and cheered and waved flags, but other than that, no.
The ship's nickname was the Fighting Eye.
Fighting Eye.
It had been attacked by kamikazes
Yes.
in the Pacific during World War II, so it
Three times.
It earned the moniker the Dry Eye because it spent time in dry dock.
Very good.
Very good, yes.
And that's where we met David. We met David aboard the Intrepid.
Yeah, and actually, I have the Intrepid's an Essex class, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually spent a midshipman cruise, a summer cruise aboard the USS Wasp, another Essex carrier. They may not know. Yeah, this was in 66 or 67, and I was on board, I guess, for 10 weeks, mainly as a plane pusher. It was an anti-submarine aircraft carrier at the time, so we were, pushing around. I don't know the aircraft designation, but very physical work. And I think I was maybe 5'10", 125 pounds at the time, so there wasn't much pushing me.
I tell you,
And
ship was put in dry dock for cleaning up the bow and everything. And they said, well, every member of the ship, our ship's crew, had to go for an X-ray. Well, the barber had TB. It was some other individual also had TB, and they took off about a dozen men from our ship because of that.
Wow.
I'll give you one lab, Bob. Before
Yes.
I'll let you continue, I'm going to give you something to put in your calendar a few years from now. This past January, the very beginning of the month, Secretary Del Toro visited the Intrepid to announce the name of the future DDG-145, the USS Intrepid.
wow, DDG.
So there will be a destroyer built, and Mrs. Del Toro is the ship's sponsor. So I guess at some point you'll have to put it in your calendar to presumably they'll commission the ship at Pier 88 South, north adjacent to the Intrepid. So you'll have a reason to come to New York and see the Intrepid commissioned.
Wow.
Mr. Grabiner, my husband transferred from the FDR to the Intrepid to be with his brother aboard the Intrepid. When he took me to New York to see the museum, he was so excited he wanted me to see his shipfitters shop. We went there, and it was what, Bob?
The head. It was the head at the back of the ship.
And then we walked downstairs to the galley. And of course, that was disappointing for Bob because it's now a McDonald's restaurant. And they didn't even have sailor uniforms on. I was surprised. But it was great. Great memories for him. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you. Well, you picked the right branch.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for sharing that. We're always used to seeing Barb. I didn't know that you were part of the team. You were
yes.
Okay, we're going to thank you very much, Doug and Arthur. Please stay on, and occasionally we might be able to come back to you. But we're going to move on to David's presentation and discussion about the naval battle of Okinawa. So let me see if I can click through this correctly and bring the PowerPoint back up. David?
Okay.
Are we seeing this?
Yeah, this War with the Wind is a book that I think I originally wrote and was published in, I think it was 2008 or 2010. So it's a while ago. And some of the details probably escape me now unless I can check the index. But anyways, with the anniversary, I guess it's is it the 85th or 80th anniversary? 80th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa. It's now out in a reissue, and there's also an audio book. And alongside is a picture of the USS Cole. This is in October 2000, when it was attacked by suicide bombers, by watercraft-borne suicide bombers in 2000, basically a year before 9/11. And I wanted to draw a link between what was happening with ships like the Cole. There was a prior USS Cole that was in Okinawa and was attacked and struck by a kamikaze. So, 2000 and I always get my numbers wrong, but 45 years later, I guess it's 45 years later, earlier, excuse me, there was another USS Cole that was victimized by a suicide bomber. So that was kind of the introduction, saying, this is current history, but let's look back at what happened in basically from 1944 to 1945. We can go to the next slide.
Hey,
let me give you a little intro here. I on a number of occasions, I've been a commentator on History Channel shows. And this was from a series called Dogfights, and it was about the kamikazes. And we joke in my family that the last person that would be called to Hollywood would be me. But I was called to Hollywood to assist on the preparation of the documentary and to be a commentator on it. So this is an example. This is taken from the aftermath of the Battle of Lingayen Gulf, when the first kamikaze attacks occurred. Now, I think we also had a slide. I guess that's going to come after this presentation, but this is to give you an idea of the level of contact and violence that these kamikazes could inflict. This short, I think it's 23 seconds video, will give you an idea of that. Now, I don't want to say that there weren't earlier instances where a pilot, either on the Japanese side or in fact on the American side, who were in the process of being shot down, knew they were going to crash, knew they were going to die, might attempt would do a suicide dive into a ship or into a ground unit. But this was the first time that Japanese aerial super suicide bombers were actually organized and carried out attacks. And it came, as I said, in October of 1944 in the wake of the Battle of Lingayen Gulf.
This was part of the famous action that we covered last year with Admiral Ziggy Sprague, right? Mm-hmm. And this was one of the escort or jeep carriers.
Right. These were escort carriers, but there were a lot of people involved and a lot of people killed. And it was a a startling surprise when it happened,
Yeah,
to say the least.
Sean, do I need to start my share again, right? I think I do. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. And I think you just want to reprise.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a little background here. There were two main offensives in the Pacific going on from 1943 to 1945. You can see in the bottom of that map, there's a Southwest Pacific offensive under MacArthur, moving up through New Guinea and heading up to the Philippines. And it was in the Philippines that these first kamikaze attacks happened. It was during the invasion of Leyte Gulf. Now that's about 4 months before the invasion of Lingayen Gulf. So it was about a 4-month difference. So, and then if you look to the right of the map, there's a Central Pacific offensive. This is under Admiral Nimitz. And the idea here is to move up the ladder, taking various island groups, beginning with the Gilbert Islands, moving up to the Marshalls and through the Carolines and Marshalls up to the Marianas. And it was during this phase that the Japanese basically lost their ability to launch aircraft from carriers because they lost most of their carriers. So to have an effective air force, they needed ground bases, and the Philippines were an obvious base. And in the Central Pacific, when the offensive got up to the Marianas Islands, there was the famous Marianas Turkey Shoot, where the Japanese lost a lot of planes and a lot of pilots. And as they move up further in the Central Pacific campaign, you get to Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And at that stage, aircraft can be launched from the southern portions of the Japanese home islands. So having land bases in the Philippines and in Japanese home islands were crucial to the ability to launch kamikaze flights. This is a photo of Admiral Takachiro Onishi, and he's kind of the godfather of the kamikaze concept. He was in charge of naval aviation on the Philippine Islands. And when he arrived to take over his new assignment and the invasion of Leyte Gulf was imminent, he found out, much to his surprise, that the number of aircraft and the number of qualified pilots he had, I think there was something less than 100 aircraft. So he reluctantly concluded that the only way they could have a successful counterattack from the air was to do kamikaze attacks. So he met with the squadron leaders and the pilots of the aircraft. This is the Navy aircraft, Japanese naval aircraft on the Philippines, and sort of put it up to them that kamikaze air attacks were going to be the way to turn back the American fleet, but sort of left it up to them to organize who, how, and when that would happen. So that was the starting point. He actually, at the end of the war, as did many other admirals, I don't say many, but some other admirals, Japanese admirals and generals, committed suicide. And in the note he wrote, he regretted that he had been the instrument for losing 4,000 Japanese pilots.
And as we'll see in this next one, well, I'll wait till after this next video.
Yeah, that's kind of a lead up to this one. This is giving you the foundation of the kamikaze concept. And it's a little video segment, again, from that Dogfights program.
Okay. Sean, let her rip. And give us a little feel, David, if you would, for who these Japanese pilots, and I use pilots maybe in quotes, were.
Well, I think in the Philippines, by the time the invasion of the Philippines occurred, Japan had lost most of its aircraft carriers. They'd lost Japanese Navy. The they lost a considerable number of pilots. You have to understand that these Japanese pilots had been in the war since the mid 1930s. They were never brought back to Japan for respite or for training new pilots. So there was a lack of qualified pilots. There were a lack of aircraft carriers, and qualified pilots to train new pilots basically didn't exist. So the new younger pilots that were coming online basically learned they got basic flight instructions. Sometimes it was by film or by model on how to do their attacks and how to maneuver. So they're young, they're committed to Japan, and certainly, originally these attacks, toko, I believe, means body crashing. So that was the concept, and these were warriors committed to the warrior way of life in Japan. And you'd like to say that a lot of them were volunteers. Probably a number of them were drafted into the concept, but by and large, they were willing to go. I mean, you'd hear vignettes or stories that these pilots were not volunteers, that they were locked into the cockpits of their planes. I don't think that's true. I think they, at the end, were willing to do it. But what they were pilots who had just basic flight training, little training in ship recognition, for example, which had an impact on the types of ships that they attacked. They were flying inferior aircraft, but that doesn't really matter if you're intending to crash your aircraft anyways. And they would set out sometimes often short of fuel, so the round trip wasn't going to be a possibility. And even when they started having engine problems or something like that, they would turn back and land and wait for another mission. But I guess if you had to sum it up, they were very inexperienced pilots. They were escorted by more qualified pilots just to get them, navigation-wise, get them into the range of targets. But they were certainly culturally willing to carry out their task. In fact, when they had to turn back, many of them were ashamed that they didn't get a chance to fulfill their mission.
Yeah. Hard for as you and I talked, it's just so hard for the Western mind, the American mind, to get our head around that. But
I think I had mentioned the coal from the year 2000 and the coal from the year 1945. You have to understand, whether it was Japan at this time or the Middle East in more recent times, this is asymmetrical warfare. When you don't have the weapons to contend with a superior enemy, you look for ways to do it that are costly, no cost, but and are sacrificial. And that kind of explains suicide warfare down to the present time.
Yep. I saw one comment in the chat from our good friend Colin Heaton. Sean, could you unmute Colin? David, Colin is a great friend of the VBC. We've done a lot of programs with him. He's got just an incredible library of World War II knowledge and interviews. Colin, you said you recognized one of the pilots in this video segment?
Yeah, the first picture shown before the montage rolled was Hiroyoshi Nishizawa. He was designated to take over command of the Kokutai that was going to lead all of the kamikaze pilots into the fleet in the Philippines. He never made it to the airfield because he was jumped by, I believe, P-51s. No, I'm not mistaken. I think it was F-6Fs. Anyway, but his transport was shot down and killed. And after he was killed, he was replaced by Junichi Oda. And of course, he died, a bunch of other guys died, but it was really, really tragic. And none of these guys were forced to be kamikazes, but there was a peer pressure of shame that no one backed down.
Yeah.
I think, there's long been a samurai tradition of, the way of the warrior and willing to sacrifice your life, readily sacrifice your life. it originally, back in the 18th and 19th century, applied to the samurai, to the upper classes. But with advances in Japanese civilization, a lot of that spirit got democratized, so that the willingness to sacrifice yourself applied to every service member in the Japanese Navy and the Japanese Army. So that's where democracy spread in Japan, by making you eligible to commit your life suicidally if the situation called for it.
Yeah, that was the post Tokugawa shogunate. They pretty much made everybody equal in the eyes except the emperor. So,
wow. Okay, let's march on. Let me put the PowerPoint back up and go on to a couple more slides and get to the Battle of Okinawa. So just to touch on these were the two commanders of the U.S. Navy, David, off Okinawa.
Yeah, now I'm going to get my fleet numbers wrong, but Admiral Raymond Spruance, he alternated with Admiral Halsey in charge of the basic U.S. Navy fleet. I believe somebody's going to correct me here, I hope. Under Raymond Spruance, I believe it was called the Fifth Fleet, and under Halsey, it was called the Third Fleet. I may have that transposed. But, Halsey was the fleet honcho in the Battle of the Invasion of Lingayen Gulf. And of course, he famously or infamously headed off in search of a largely token Japanese carrier fleet. But Spruance, he was assigned by Nimitz to island invasion, where it was crucial that the fleet stay in place and make the most of the invasion. So he was in charge in the Marianas, for example, and I believe at Okinawa, or at least for a period at Okinawa. Now, Kelly Turner, he's an admiral subordinate to Spruance in this case, and he was the authority and the commander of the amphibious operations. So he was in charge of the amphibious ships. He was in charge of the amphibious troops until they established themselves on the island. He was a very irascible figure. His nickname was Terrible, Kelly Terrible Turner. And he was supposed to know about everything, and considered himself an expert in everything involved in the invasion. In fact, there were often disputes of when the Marines were on their own once they reached the island, that Kelly Turner would try to order the Marines around as well. But he was a very consequential figure, probably under-recognized in terms of the Navy and Marine accomplishments during World War II in the Central Pacific.
There's a great biography on Kelly Turner I read years ago. I've always been an admirer of his, despite his irascible personality. He basically created the U.S. Navy's amphibious warfare methods and process, starting with Guadalcanal. And certainly the attack part of it, but what people don't appreciate is the logistical train behind all that. And he was the guy who organized all that, developed the methods over the first 2 or 3 years of the war. I do think he's underappreciated. Just allow my 2 cents there.
Sure.
Then we have this huge fleet that appears off Okinawa, actually just prior to April the 1st. You think these ship numbers more or less correct here, David?
Yeah, I guess so. You look at these numbers, and the numbers will always change. I just assume it's going to be a huge number. I will say, in terms of this picture, a lot of the watercraft that you see there, in fact, the type of ship that Arthur was on, these are all inventions of ships that none of these ships existed. I don't want to say none of them, but most of them did not exist, certainly in any volume, when World War II started. So it was the creation of an amphibious fleet was a phenomenon during World War II, and just the number of ships that were mobilized for these invasions. The numbers are incredible. I mean, there's rivalry for this with what happened at D-Day in Normandy. But if you consider the situation in the Pacific, where between invasions, maybe you can go back a couple slides to the map that showed the Southwest Pacific and the Central Pacific. You got to understand that these fleets of ships, they would. Am I control? Yeah, I guess I am. They would start in the Gilbert Islands. They would take places like Tarawa. They would move to the Carolines and to the Marshall Islands. We're talking hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles to send troops, to set up the logistics, to deliver ammunition and food and, you name it. Then they take those islands, they regroup, they go another 1,000 or a couple thousand miles up to the Marianas. And then they take the Marianas, they go on to Iwo Jima and Okinawa. It's an amazing feat. Now, the fleet for the D-Day invasion of Normandy was huge, probably more than any of these fleets. But that was there were invasions in southern France and Italy as well. But, once they got ashore, once the troops got ashore on D-Day, the Navy's job was done, but the Navy's job was always ongoing in the Pacific because of the logistics involved and the distances involved. It's just an amazing accomplishment when you look at the time frame involved. This is basically from 1943, the end of 1943, through the middle of 1945, that all this ocean and all these land specs were conquered, and then on to the next one. That's my 2 cents worth.
Well, the other story of World War II, of course, is the logistical side of the U.S. Economy that developed all this over the course of 4 or 5 years. I mean, the Navy had a head start. There was a big naval bill passed, I believe it was in 1940, that set up the beginning of the fleet.
Yeah, the Two Ocean Navy.
Yeah, but it takes years to build this stuff. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And of course, now Okinawa itself.
Now this is a map from the book, and it shows Okinawa. But if you look in the upper left corner, you'll see what were a series of radar picket stations. And this was the U.S. Navy's attempt to counter the kamikaze attacks. And these were systematic attacks. These were many aircraft at a time. There were days that were scheduled and hordes of aircraft would come towards Okinawa. And the idea was to set up these radar picket stations. The Navy ships were equipped with radar that could track the incoming aircraft. They had special teams that they assigned to. Usually on each radar picket station, there would be some type of destroyer, along with another craft, usually a landing craft, a weapon-equipped landing craft that was basically there to pick up the survivors. And they too would come under attack. Now we talk about the inexperience of the Japanese kamikaze pilots. They would come down from southern Japan, and the first things they would encounter would be these radar picket stations. Their job was to destroy the vital ships, the big ships, the amphibious supply ships, the aircraft carriers. But they ended up attacking basically the first ship that they encountered. So if you look at the very top of that insert, you'll see radar picket station 14, RP14. You'll see RP1, you'll see RP2, RP3, maybe RP4, and maybe RP15. These ships on these radar picket stations absorbed the brunt of the kamikaze attacks because they were the first ships seen. They would have access to flights of aircraft that were sent in to shoot down kamikazes, but it's like, it's like a swarm of flies. They're easily swatted down, but there's always more coming. So it ended up in some various very heavily attacked days. Now, Arthur was there on April 2nd. That was, I think, probably the first onslaught of kamikazes towards these radar picket stations.
And we have next an excellent, about 10, 12-minute film that David has shared with us about one of the more famous destroyers that was attacked on the picket line, the USS Laffey.
I want to make a comment that somewhere in here you're going to see a very handsome guy. It was me about 15 years ago.
Sean,
more than 15 years ago. My goodness. Okay.
Sean, perhaps before we show this film, it'd be a good time now to take our quick station break.
Sure thing. Let me stop. Or you already stopped your share, and I'll start my share. So just wanted to let everybody know that just saw the new magazine this morning at our in-person breakfast out in the east part of Pittsburgh. We are going to be honoring the fall of Saigon with a program on Monday night, which will be an open conversation format. So we will have questions for our audience, our Vietnam veterans who would like to talk about their remembrance of fall of Saigon. We talked with several veterans this morning, including Ben Wright, who's on with us tonight. And again, so this will be our open conversation. You'll see that slide here in a second. But this is our magazine, also commemorating that. And we'll be talking about also in the magazine, the fall of Kabul. Those should be hitting mailboxes probably within the next week. But if you don't get it, because we don't have your address, so please send that to us and we will make sure that you get onto the mailing list. Again, this is a free quarterly magazine, so we will have more issues coming out later this year. As I said, Monday night, fall of Saigon, be there. And next Thursday, liberation of U.S. POWs in April 1945. Glenn, do you want to give us a preview of that program?
Actually, we moved that date.
We moved that date. I missed that.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's more now the end of May 29th, I believe.
All right.
And Thursday is really another special program. This time we're jumping back to Europe and the beginning of the end of the war in Europe, May 1st. VE Day is obviously May 8th, but we're having on a veteran, a 102-year-old veteran, Russell Freeberg, who we had on briefly a few weeks ago, and also an esteemed historian, David Hogan, who is the recently retired former director of the U.S. Army Military History Center. So he's another walking encyclopedia on the World War II, especially the war in Europe, on which he's written several books. So that's next Thursday, May the 1st.
Thank you for that breaking news. And let's see here. Also, Ben Wright did have if I could get my chat to roll to the right question. I believe the question was, did any of the kamikaze pilots know any of the Kai-10 suicide submariners?
I doubt it. I mean, I'm not sure how. There would have been separate training. And there's a guy named Bob Mayer, M-A-I-R, who wrote a book about that phenomenon. He would be the authority on that. I don't see a reason why the pilots would have connections to that particular suicide effort. But it is important to note that, we're talking about aerial suicide, but there are also obviously these these torpedoes, these surface craft that were launched from Okinawa trying to attack ships. They were not very successful.
We had on the author of that book, Kai-10. I think it was last year, but we're going to do another program later this year.
Sure, but he would be the one to ask that.
Oh, Barb, that was you who asked the question. The Kai-10s were volunteer. Were they volunteers just like the pilots were?
Yeah, I assume so. Yeah, I mean,
okay. Colin says yes.
As somebody said in this, that there was a lot of peer pressure involved. If you're asking for volunteers, and you're you're following the warrior way, there's a lot of communal pressure to volunteer, even reluctantly.
I recall a book I read about, kamikaze pilots, and the classic scene was there's a group of students, maybe student pilots, whatever. There's a couple dozen of them. The guy comes out and makes a speech about becoming a kamikaze pilot, and basically, who wants to do this or who doesn't want to do it? And of course, everybody steps forward because of the nature of the whole thing. So, okay, I think we're ready for this second film.
Let me give a little preview.
Please.
This is a battle involving the USS Laffey, a destroyer. I believe it was not a Sumner class. It must have been a Fletcher class destroyer, I believe. And this was, and I forget the date now. That's how long ago I wrote the book. But I believe it's in mid-April. They were on one of the more northerly radar picket stations, and they bore the brunt of this day's attacks.
Wow. Incredibly well done. And it takes you right there to the, just as if you were there.
I want to note that Ari Fatridis is also a quartermaster like Arthur. They have that in common. And it's interesting. This shows what's happening on the outside and the crew that is above decks. But you often think the people in the engineering spaces who are doing all that maneuvering and keeping up speed and reversing course, they're as vulnerable as anybody, and they can't see what's going on. It's a remarkable feat of strength to be down there and doing that.
Did this captain of the ship, Beckton, to have that right?
Yes.
Did he win was he awarded a Medal of Honor?
I think he may have gotten the Navy Cross. I'm not sure he got a Medal of Honor. Just doing it in the line of duty. Of course, the ship is probably most or some of survived. It didn't go back into action. It was, or I guess it eventually did to some extent, but it was towed back to the States and made a tour of various ports, just so people could come aboard and see what their defense dollars were going to, and how this ship had survived that terrible onslaught. And I guess it still exists as a museum ship is it South Carolina? Is that right?
Yeah, Mount Pleasant. Patriots Point.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And that was, I believe it was I believe it was a Sumner class destroyer, not a Fletcher. And because it had the main battery guns were twin 5-inch 38s, not single guns. And the ship that I served on was the USS Gearing, which was the Gearing class that followed the Sumner. And I was actually the gunnery officer on the USS Gearing. So I had those same type of guns. I remember we were doing qualifications in Cuba, gunnery qualifications, and we tried to defend against an attacking jet aircraft, and it didn't even come close. So they could handle it. They could handle a Japanese aircraft in 1945, but that was probably the height of their efficiency.
Yeah, this Laffey that we're talking about, the second Laffey actually, was a Sumner class, I believe.
Yeah.
What's incredible about this story of the naval battles off Okinawa, we just went through one of the more noted ones, one of the more famous ones because of the severity and extremity of the attacks. But that was one among hundreds.
Yes.
Correct, David?
And I forget, there are obviously statistics on the number of ships damaged, the number of ships sunk, and those escape me now. But I have that in the book, so get the book.
Yes, please do. I've read it, and it's difficult to read at times because of the savagery of these attacks and what these naval men went through, what these seamen went through. But necessary to read and
Yeah,
necessary.
it's interesting. I I keep knocking myself ever since. I interviewed, I think, a total of over 300 Navy veterans, did audio recordings, and I don't have those tapes anymore. So I keep kicking myself. I mean, you'll see the results in the book because I quote from those transcripts, but I never saved those recordings.
Oh, that's a lot.
I feel your pain. I feel your
Ouch.
pain.
So
and these were, this was in 2007 and 2008, and there was some very vivid accounts. Again, they're quoted in the book, but most or all are not with us anymore. So,
yeah. Well, one other aspect of this I want to David to address. And back to this map. Everybody see the map? Okay. So I had read much before this, but David, at the beginning of his part of the book on Okinawa, talks about how the Navy decided to take this little island grouping down here. How do you pronounce that? Karamo-reto?
Karamo-reto.
And what was the reasoning, and what did Karamo-reto become, David?
Well, it became a supply and repair shop. All the ships that were damaged but still floating from the kamikaze attacks were brought into Karamo-reto and repaired, and at least initial repairs were conducted there. It was also a storehouse, but if you have pictures of Karamo-reto, at that time you would see a bunch of damaged ships. It was to have a ship come into Karamo-reto could be pretty dispiriting because of the other wrecks or near wrecks that you would see floating there. But I think there was some anticipation that they would need it as a supply point, but it became a first aid emergency room for all the ships that were damaged but still afloat.
And many of the ships that were damaged were repaired and sent back out.
Yeah, went back. Yeah, sure. I don't want people to believe that the Laffey or any other ship spent all their time on one radar picket station. They were rotated through there, but a lot of them spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go to the last couple pieces, maybe this chart here is not from my book, but I did an article for a now defunct magazine called World War II magazine. That actually tracked all the attacks. I think it's kind of a vivid depiction, one picture depiction of all the various attacks that occurred on the USS Laffey. Just miraculous that it survived. So before we jump to the last couple of points that I asked David to make, let me stop the share and let the audience participate and ask any questions of David or Arthur that you'd like to. And if we have any remaining time, we'll jump into the last couple of points. Sean?
I don't think there's any thing in the chat question-wise, but good chatter. Anybody raised hands here? I have a gallery view. But if nothing, go ahead, Glenn.
We do have just an incredible chat that goes on in the background here. I have a hard time following it as we're interviewing David, but thank you, man. That's an interesting, lot of interesting background there. Okay, let me put the PowerPoint back up. So I asked David to address a couple of other events, and this is a picture of the battleship. The super battleship Yamato being blown up by the U.S. Navy. And one reason I thought this was of interest, in our program last year on the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, actually, I'm sorry, it was 2 years ago, we covered with Ian Toll, another fantastic author of World War II naval history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and we had a veteran on, and this name is gonna slip my mind right now. I had it, Lee Friel. who was an Avenger pilot, torpedo pilot, who put a torpedo in the side of the Musashi during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And he, along with a couple dozen others, and submarines, I think, as well, perhaps, but he was part of the sinking of the battle of the super battleship Musashi. The Yamato, I think, was there, but then retreated along with the rest of the fleet and survived the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And David, why did they sortie the Yamato here?
Well, it was a suicide mission. The idea was to the Yamato was sitting around, and they sent that ship along with a couple of, I believe, destroyer escorts. Not much of an escort, of course, but the objective was to get to Okinawa, ground the ship, and use their massive guns in support of the Japanese troops on the island. Needless to say, they didn't make it.
Yeah, yeah. It just further points out the desperate situation of the Japanese.
I don't think there were any. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there were any survivors from the Yamato that survived the trip. And they certainly didn't. They didn't go with a round trip fuel supply. I know that.
Yeah. Another suicide attempt, another successful one.
Right.
And then this is just such an iconic picture from the Battle of Okinawa. I could not include it. And this is the famous shot of the Bunker Hill, the U.S. aircraft carrier, the Bunker Hill, an Essex-class carrier, which was severely damaged by kamikazes. David, any background here you can provide?
Well, one thing we haven't covered is that the Japanese were obviously trying to attack and destroy the aircraft carriers. That would have been their primary target. And they had some success, but I don't believe, they sunk some escort carriers, but they never sank a U.S. Navy fleet carrier like the Bunker Hill.
Yeah, I know
not for lack of trying, but they did.
I know this from previous programs of all the U.S. aircraft carriers sunk in the Pacific in World War II were early in the war, mostly during the Battle of Guadalcanal, and they were not the Essex-class carriers that then came out. No Essex-class carrier was destroyed. Several were hit bad enough that they had, like the Bunker Hill, had to be taken off combat line and repaired.
I think the fast carriers like the Bunker Hill were, in terms of the Navy in World War II, were the most revolutionary and effective weapon that came forth in the Pacific.
Yes. And I found this picture rather compelling as well. When David and I were discussing this, he reminded me there were British aircraft carriers involved in the Battle of Okinawa. And David, what was different about the British aircraft?
Well, they had steel decks, and the U.S. Navy carriers had wooden decks. They were because of wooden decks, they were lighter and more mobile than the British carriers. But in terms of defending against the kamikaze attack on the flight deck of a U.S. Navy carrier, you can see the results here. Yeah. Can be pretty devastating. Although, in most cases, somehow or other, they would resume flight operations typically within hours of one of these crashes. I'm not sure if this particular one applies, but I know the Bunker Hill and some others, they quickly got flight operations back going.
I'm not sure about the Bunker Hill. I know it was withdrawn eventually to Ulithi, the big harbor the Navy used, and eventually I think it had to go back to California and was done for the war. One of the few Essex-class carriers that met even that fate.
You'll notice there's a destroyer alongside. You can see the gun mounts, and they're either fighting fires or taking off the wounded.
Yeah. Massive ships, just massive. I think probably most of our audience have been to either the Intrepid or been on the Midway, the Yorktown, and others, and they're just so impressive. Okay, and now the final, or almost final slide, the Butcher's Bill. We had this up 3 weeks ago when we did the land battle. And I just want to note here, and I asked David a question in person, and I'll ask him again. So you note with the Navy, 10,007 casualties, of which 4,907 were killed in action, almost 50%. Whereas the land armies, the Marines and the Army, had more normal ratio of casualties to killed. Why did the Navy have so many killed in action?
Well, a couple of things. I think I told you. There was a period during April of 1945 where the Navy casualties basically doubled, or twice the number of casualties on the ground in Okinawa. And that was because of the kamikaze attacks. But the reason, a reason for these ratios, I'm going to assume, if your ship gets severely damaged or sinks, you go in the water, and whether you're wounded or not. And if somebody's not there to rescue you, you become a fatality. So, I think that's a factor. I think I mentioned on these radar picket stations, there would be a destroyer or two, and there would also be an LCS, which is a landing craft, and they were basically there to pick up survivors. That was their role, although they often got attacked as well.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great program to appreciate the role of the Navy. David, our very last slide, your latest book, but there's a connection.
I just wanted to make a connection. The ship pictured on the right is the USS Bory, and I believe it was the last U.S. Navy combat ship attacked by a kamikaze. I believe it happened either in late July or early August. And this is the USS Bory, which is a Sumner-class destroyer, I believe. And I mentioned that because an earlier version of the USS Bory, in other words, the USS Bory's namesake, was a destroyer, a World War II, World War I era destroyer that served in the Atlantic. And on October 31st, 1943, basically Halloween night, it conducted a one-on-one battle with a Nazi U-boat. So the Navy has a long heritage, and a ship that preceded the Bory that was attacked by a kamikaze was another Navy destroyer that attacked and sank a German U-boat. During hand-to-hand combat, by the way, as you can see from the picture on the left. That's the cover of the book, and it was published in 2023.
I'm sure it's a very compelling book. Sure. And what are you working on now, David? What's the next book?
I never say until I have a contract. No contract, no tell. No, I'm working on several proposals right now. So as long as brain and eyes allow.
More naval history?
Well, this one is not, but that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Keep us guessing. Guessing.
There are two questions, one from Colin and I believe maybe one from Greg. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, question. Were there any hospital ships off Okinawa? I know they were used for transport of wounded, and did they come under fire?
Boy, I don't know. I believe there must have been. There must have been ships. And I would say, early on, there were relatively few, at least during the first days, there were relatively few casualties on land. It was pretty much an unopposed landing. Of course, that turned around much later, but I believe there must have been hospital ships there, and they must have come in and gone out very quickly. The main fleet, the amphibious fleet, the ones that weren't directly supplying the troops on Okinawa, they would withdraw a safe distance from Okinawa to avoid these attacks. So I think they were if they were around, they were largely spared that risk.
Thanks.
Greg Yost.
Yes, several. Thank you so much for a great program. Just several quick comments and the like. I knew a Marine on Okinawa, and of course during the kamikazes, not only could you see the planes, but the ack coming up from the ships. And I asked this Marine, I said, "Did you see the kamikaze attacks?" And he said, "Oh yes, I can't believe anything could have flown through that. The air was just solid with just flak and ack and kamikazes." I also had a cousin who obviously never knew, who was a skipper of, I think, maybe like a destroyer escort. And one of the stories that the family told, I never met the guy, was that during a kamikaze attack, a destroyer got hit and the fuel leaked and the water was burning. And his ship was trying to get up to rescue some of the survivors who were in the water, and they couldn't get there because the water was on fire.
Right.
So you know, these things happen. You know, obviously it's not only a tragedy, you know, on the ship itself, but even on the surrounding ships that aren't even affected by the kamikaze. I guess a third thing, which we'll cover in August, I'm sure, is the degree to which the kamikaze attacks changed U.S. thinking during the proposed invasion of Japan and the atomic weapons. So I'm sure this group's going to cover that in a couple of months. And I don't know. I hope it's not too late to comment on two very famous U.S. ships that were affected by kamikazes. And if you would like to comment on two ships that were hit, one was the USS Indianapolis, and the other was not really affected, but had an interesting story, the USS Missouri.
Well, the Indianapolis was not, to my knowledge, struck by an aerial kamikaze. Wasn't that torpedoed?
Yeah, that was sunk by the I-58.
No. What I mean is, it was off of Okinawa and it was hit by a kamikaze. Had to go, it was damaged badly enough, they had to go back for repairs. So while it was back for repairs is when they decided to use that ship to transport the bomb components. So it was hit by a kamikaze off of Okinawa, and that's what got it into the mission that we now know to be famous. And do you know the story of the Missouri with the kamikaze? The Missouri was hit by a kamikaze plane that the bomb didn't go off. The plane deflected into the water, but the pilot of the kamikaze landed on the Missouri's deck. Now, he died, and the captain of the Missouri ordered him to be buried with full military honors at sea. So they called up the crew on the deck, or some of the crew, and they put a Japanese flag around him, and they buried this kamikaze pilot at sea. Which I don't know what that means.
That I've never heard. I'm looking through my book. That's my quick reference here. I believe the Indianapolis was hit. I'm not sure the date. Was hit by a kamikaze attack.
Yeah, I've read that several times. I think one in your book.
David.
It was
they bomb blast to her stern, killing 9 sailors. Yeah. Not sure of the date.
So it's ironic in that it being hit and then withdrawn for repairs is what led to it being by almost happenstance, the ship that carried the atomic bomb parts, back and forth, and its subsequent sinking, which we are going to do a program near the end of July. I can't remember the date for sure, with Colin Heaton on the sinking of the U.S. Indianapolis. So give you fair warning. Well, listen, we've passed the witching hour by quite a bit. Is there any other questions that anybody would like to ask of David or of Arthur? Arthur and Doug have hung in there with us as far as I can see.
I don't see anything. Martin put some pictures here into the chat. Barb, you have a question. Hold on a sec. I'll ask you to unmute.
Yes, I'd like to speak with Colin about two possible additions to the conversation on the USS Indianapolis. If everybody watches the video, it's about 10 minutes long. It's entitled Sleep Well, You Men of Indy's Crew. It's a 10-minute video by Bob Welsh, W-E-L-S-H, on YouTube. Sleep Well, You Men of Indy's Crew. It's a marvelous video. It tells about the story of the USS Indianapolis. And we have an artist who also painted the last
as it was
leaving San Francisco underneath the bridge, artist of the Indianapolis last time. So maybe Colin, I can speak with Colin about that. Thank you.
Sure. Sure. And I see Doug and Art have their hand up.
Yes. I'll share one very brief story. 10 years ago in 2015, March of 2015, now 70 years after the Battle of Okinawa, that and a few fellow World War II veterans of the Pacific Theater returned to the battlefields.
Bombs get us all in the same picture. Put over by me.
Iwo Jima. So one of the World War II veterans aboard, former Marine, a gentleman named E. Bruce Heilman, he was an educator, former president of the University of Richmond, he's since deceased, saw that was going to be on the trip USS Laurens. And he would tell people he was at Okinawa, but there was some skepticism. So he told Dad the story. Dad said, I brought with me on this journey the ship's log, every port of call. They went down to the hotel lobby, and the people behind the desk made a copy so that Bruce could have a copy of the ship's log to prove that he was at Okinawa.
Wow. Interesting. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Well, listen, let us close, and let me start by thanking the honor of having Arthur on with us. Doug, thank you for all the work you do to support your father and keep him going. We appreciate that, and we love to have our World War II heroes on anytime we can. Arthur, thank you. And then, of course, to David Sears. David, it's been a wonderful evening. Your background and knowledge on the Pacific naval history is incredible. The couple of your books I've read, I highly recommend. I'd like to get a hold of Duel in the Deep, and we'd love to have you back, perhaps more on one of our segments about the Vietnam War with our Vietnam veterans. We could have you recount a little more depth your experiences.
Yeah, if they want to talk to a Saigon warrior, that'd be great.
Anybody that was there was in the line of fire. And, you might want to tune in next week for the Fall of Saigon show, which
yeah, you're going to send me my free membership, so I may well do that.
I will send you the free membership. The only thing you have to suffer is about 22 emails a day. That's okay. That's the price of membership. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I think it's a great organization you have. I know something from you about its origins and how it's expanded over the years. So it's a great thing and a great ongoing thing, World War II and beyond.
Thanks so very much, David. We look forward to more interaction with you. Sean, I understand you're on vacation next week, so we wish you a hearty vacation, a well-deserved one.
Thank you all. Yep, my family and I are heading out on a Disney cruise, so I will be out next week, but I'll be back the following Monday with a full report.
With some Mickey Mouse stories and hats on, I'm sure.
That's right. You all have a great evening. Enjoy, and Todd will be back on Monday night.
Thank you all.